I'm here to present on behalf of Allison Rosenthal. For those of you who don't know, Allison has had a family emergency with her daughter that she's attending to over the last couple of weeks. Allison is an incredible young leader in the industry. She spent 18 years with Bristol Myers Squibb in Montreal, starting off in clinical research, and then found she had a passion for business and some natural interpersonal and strategic skills. So after an 18-year run with Bristol Myers Squibb, Allison was given the enviable opportunity to build a Canadian pharmaceutical subsidiary from scratch starting in 2012. So this is really her story of how her success, which you'll see in the numbers don't lie, is based on building a thriving, winning culture from day one. So the biggest challenges that Allison and her team face at Otsuka as they grow, and over the past 3 years they've doubled the size of their footprint here in Canada in terms of number of employees as well as their business infrastructure, is really continuing to focusing on hiring the right talent. She's got a great expression, slow to hire and quick to fire. So if it's looking for A-plus talent, sometimes it takes a little longer to find them, but if the fit's not right, don't be afraid to make the changes, and that certainly has served Allison well to this point. She's very much passionate about differentiating with customers, providing the customers the kind of experience that we might see elsewhere in our lives. Allison's a big Starbucks fan. She constantly talks about why she's happy to pay a premium for her Starbucks every morning, because it's about the customer experience. And her goal is to help her organization continuously punch above their weight in the marketplace. And of course, pay unto Caesar and certainly provide revenue growth, profitability, and use that profitability to fund opportunities for her people going forward. So the North Star for Otsuka, particularly in Canada, is based on culture. For any of you who've worked for a Japanese multinational, you know that culture and the transformation of culture globally is a big deal. So see, Ross, you're sitting in the front of the room. You know how big a deal that is for Taiho. Certainly a big deal here for Otsuka. And Allison sat on that committee to decide what the core cultural values would be globally. They picked 8. And in Canada, she said it was going to be really important to make sure that culture played here in Canada was customized for the Canadian market. So the team met there to define their culture with some help from Dr. David Jameson, and they started to move down that path to walk the talk and lead that culture from the top. So the value chain that they pay attention to at Otsuka is something that I'm sure all of you recognize, that your values and the way you behave as a leader in the organization is what creates the culture. As Dr. David Jameson shared, 80% of the culture for companies that you work for starts to look a lot like the person sitting in the corner office. So your behavior will drive the experience that your employees have, and the experience that your employees have drives the experience that your customers have. So if your people are showing up in front of the customer in an inappropriate way, look no further than the mirror. How are they being led? What environment are you creating for them? Is the way that Allison challenges her people. And that customer satisfaction is what drives the stakeholder value. Can you punch above your weight? Can you get an unfair share of the prescription support or the product support in the marketplace? And you can certainly see that the data doesn't lie. She is the top performing subsidiary in Otsuka on a worldwide basis, measured a number of different ways. But more importantly, profit per employee and contribution per employee are far above her peers, even in the US market. And she attributes that to this expression: get the customer experience right, you must get the employee experience right. So how she treats her management team, how her management team treats the frontline managers and the sales force cascades forward in this philosophy as she moves along. So why focus on culture? From Allison's perspective, it's all about connectivity. Connectivity through that chain we just described. And people wanting to be part of something bigger. So from the get-go, they built this into the hiring practices that they used. They had a recruiting organization that helped them with this. They then since onboarded one of those recruiters as their director of HR, and Joni does a great job of protecting this culture as they hire, looking for entrepreneurial, positive people, and in the Japanese expression, the Jisho Shug. Their engagement survey results in 2013 were quite positive. They're world leaders in this area, but they weren't complacent with a 92% score, which I'm sure many of us in the room would be envious of that score. But they did introduce the culture team to look below the surface in 2014, and that's when we were introduced to Allison and her team. And they wanted to look at, okay, how can we welcome and onboard our employees? What are the tools that we have? How do we make sure we recognize the behavior we're looking for and discourage the behavior we don't want to see? And how do we make that recognition public? So they've used a number of interesting technology tools to do that. But we're going to focus a little bit on the guts of their understanding of their culture. So in 2015, they conducted a Barrett survey using the instrument that Dr. Jameson just discussed. It's a three-question survey that followed on the heels of their engagement survey. And what they found out from the then 73 employees, and they had 90% participation in the survey, which is very high, is they had one of the lowest entropy scores ever recorded in the pharmaceutical industry. It was only 3%. Well, just to show you the contrast, the average entropy in Canadian organizations that participate in this instrument is 21%. So 3% was an extraordinary result and put her into the top 5% of participating organizations. And this is from 316 companies in Canada that have used this tool. The key takeaways for Allison and the team were that, yes, they had very little that was getting in the way of employee engagement, but the employees were looking for some new things in the culture. Although the culture was positive, there were some things that they wanted more of. More focus on onboarding, more customer centricity, more leadership development, and as David mentioned earlier, more accountability. So they started working through, you'll see here's a typical agenda for an onboarding session where there's a lot of energy from the senior management team, including a visit with their CFO and with Allison for each onboarding class. Customer engagement, accountability, and leadership development were the focus since 2015. What Allison and the team were looking for is, could we make this culture even stronger? Could we embed this culture even further? So they engaged in a number of different activities with providers on leadership development and engaged the entire organization through a summit to decide how they wanted to move forward together, similar to what Tim discussed, brought this through the organization and led this through the organization, so there was a high degree of ownership. The other offshoots were that you saw a lot more engagement, a lot more activity happening from senior management in the field with customers. There's a picture of Allison with Mike Laranjo, their CFO, spending a lot of time getting to know their people, engaging quite a bit in activity in the Montreal community. My son just graduated from Concordia, and one of the things he was looking at after his undergraduate was a place to get started in his career. He said, "Dad, you get to visit companies all over the world for the last 14 years. Where would you want to work?" I had to tell him top on my list was Otsuka. From the moment you're greeted to the moment you go through meetings, you're treated like family, and that's a lot of what you see in these pictures. So back in 2017, at the beginning of this year, they wanted to retest that survey with Dr. Barrett or Dr. Jameson to see how far they'd come along in the Barrett results. Incredibly, they reduced their entropy score from 3% to 1%. 1% is the lowest entropy score ever recorded in the pharmaceutical industry in the world. And it's the lowest score ever recorded in Canadian companies across all industries. So they've done a really good job of eliminating those things that get in the way of their engagement of their employees. Even more importantly, they've now started to pivot off the strong internal culture that they have, and their focus is now, how can they punch above their weight in front of customers? How do they pivot the strong internal culture and make it a strong external brand and provide that customer experience that will drive market share to the next level? So her takeaway message for all of you in the audience is to pay attention to your own values, the way you lead your culture, the way you engage employees, because that will drive your value. Now, nothing's better than the numbers, right? These are impressive numbers. Take a look at the kind of business that they built over the past 5 years, and then pay particular attention between 2014 and 2016 full year. Those results are astounding. That's doubling their business in 12 months and overachieving expectations. Even as the #1 performing subsidiary, they finished at 150% the previous year and over 46% the budget. And Allison would tell you, if she was standing here today, that the #1 ingredient behind that performance was culture. So if you don't think it's worth paying attention to, I'm sorry, but I'm a scientist too, and numbers don't lie. So this is something that Allison recommended you read. It's a recent publication, Fast Company, that talked about the importance of culture. And these are top performing companies that were featured in a book by Raj Sisodia called Firms of Endearment. And these stories are incredible, but they represent the same kind of data you saw with Allison Rosenthal. So here's your audience participation slide one more time. Which of the 4 business levers is the most important to long-term effective leadership of a Canadian pharmaceutical company? Canadian unit strategy, sales and marketing excellence, local talent development, Canadian subsidiary, and sales team culture. Well, those numbers don't lie either. So the original survey, when we read the same question at the beginning of the talk, was almost peanut butter spread about 25%. But I guess if you're looking at this as a bit of a CME, I guess we've proven that we're decent at CME. So the takeaways here, sorry, just to go back one slide. Culture can be a core strategic differentiator. No question it drives business results, as you saw from some of the data that we shared from Tim Dowell from Allison Rosenthal. But more importantly, it gives you a chance to be part of the culture you'd like to belong to as well. If you're a leader, it's one of the advantages you have. You get to create the culture you want to be part of. So improvements in culture certainly can be linked to the improvements of results, but this is a process that is now well defined. Define, measure, and lead is the process for moving forward. Thank you.